We'll do it live.
Thank you, Lance. And we're live. Hello and welcome to MashTalk, Mashable's own Google Plus Hangout, where today we are talking about what else? Apple. Yesterday, unless you were living under a rock, you would know that Apple has unveiled 3 new products: the iPhone 6, the iPhone 6 Plus, the Apple Watch, as well as its mobile payments platform, Apple Pay. I'm Ryan Lytle, Social Projects Manager here at Mashable, and introducing our esteemed panel, Pete Paschal, our tech editor.
Hello.
Hello. Lance Ulanoff, our chief correspondent.
Hello.
Christina Warren, our senior tech analyst.
What
and
up?
Chris Taylor, our deputy editor.
Yo.
So, if you were trying to watch us online yesterday, you would also know that it was very difficult to do as the live stream kept crashing and whatnot. But for those who were able to watch it, and also for those who were there, it was quite the interesting event. And Chris Taylor, you had a piece about how it was Apple's reality distortion field at its best. So can you elaborate on that, and then we'll open it up to everyone else.
Yes, well, the reality distortion field did seem to distort the live stream yesterday. We actually now know that it was a small Twitter bug that they wanted to add at the bottom of the live stream that caused the problem. So they would be trying again to be so social.
Twitter's always crashing the internet, man.
Darn it. And really, they don't need to be so social because we're all watching anyway. You know, we're all breathlessly, watching the live blogs. And really, every time I do this, I mean, this must be what my, 20th, 25th product launch of Apple. Every time it just seems to get bigger. It isn't necessarily always a bigger event, although this one was with the 2,400-seater Flint Center being the location. But it seems to be a bigger deal. And this one obviously was a huge deal with the first new product of Tim Cook's era. So they really went overboard with all of the usual reality distortion techniques, as this has been known since the Steve Jobs era. So basically, there's a certain flash to it. There's the celebrity presence. There's the fact that Apple employees took up. Lance, I think I'm right in saying it was about the first 10 to 15 rows were all Apple employees, right?
Oh yeah, and they created a cheering section. I mean, there's something about sort of human psychology, or maybe it's sociology, that once you start cheering, other people sort of join in, and you have enough people cheering, it really just pulls everybody along. So you had this feeling of enthusiasm and momentum from the get-go because people were amped up, but it was, of course, a lot of Apple people.
And we're sitting at the back of the auditorium sort of trying to stay objective, but at the same time, we're rooting for great products, right? We want the products to be fantastic. So, and then there is this sort of sense of a little bit of Stockholm syndrome creeping in. We're held captive there by the Apple PR reps. I mean, literally, at the start, we were there fenced in. For I think Lance, you were the first journalist on the scene.
Of course you were.
I was the patient zero.
You were there at
Patient. Emphasis on patient.
I showed up.
Local time, was it?
Yeah, it was. We were there by 6:30 a.m. and they had it set up, and there was, almost to a person, there was sort of excitement, almost glee among the Apple employees. There was one guy who was kind of grumpy and kept sort of, I don't know, he would just always look at me like I was standing in the wrong place. But by and large, everybody was very happy. But it felt, I've been to a lot of these events like Chris, and there's sort of a containment. Even if you're at the Moscone Center in SF, it still feels sort of like you don't feel a sprawl. But the Flint Center is not really just one place. It's got the building, then it had an area of seating area, then the queued up area where the media was in one area next to another set of guests, and then there was the big white box, and you didn't even know, which is very unusual. You didn't know where to stand. So even though I was the first guy there, then I kept asking, where do I stand to queue up to be media? Because we were, and Chris would know this, we wanted to be like, we wanted to be first in the theater. We thought it was important to be up front. Turned out it wasn't. But they didn't give us any direction, basically. And I'm not exaggerating. This is really unusual for Apple. This never normally happens. They say, okay, you can go, you can sign. I'm the first guy, I get my pass, and I'm following somebody with an Apple shirt. That person led me around the entire building and back to where I started.
It really was surprisingly unclear. I mean, just driving in, you know, the signs were not clear about where you should park. The entry point was not clear. I mean, they did have us lined up in rows. This is, you know, the kind of thing you guys don't see. You know, this is a behind-the-scenes thing that happens for every Apple event, that we get lined up into rows. Broadcast media goes in first. I mean, the other unusual thing about this is that they, you know, Apple PR, who are the people, and I mentioned this in the story, people who, you know, getting them to return your calls is like pulling teeth during the rest of the year, and then suddenly here they are, they're your best friends, you know, they're the best versions of themselves, everyone's smiles, everyone's happy. So it's really fun. So there's definitely this celebration atmosphere about the whole thing, and even when it's a little sort of unfocused, or they're trying to shove us through a single door into the theater, as they did. I mean, you know, and when it breaks and they let the journalists in, and we all go rushing for the single door, and they won't even open the second door to let us in. It's extremely bizarre, and you know, you definitely get that sort of crushed sense of being at a sports event, you know, where everyone's cheering for the same team. So the atmosphere.
That venue, at least, you know, from a journalist's perspective, and I would gather from, I guess, from anybody else's perspective who sat there, was more comfortable than any place I've ever been to for an Apple event. And obviously, it's not the first time they've used the Flint Center. They used it historically, you know, famously for the launch of the Mac. But
And the iMac.
I felt like, I looked over at Chris, I go, there's a lot of leg room here. We were like, you know, my knees were not hitting the back of the chair. They had set up power. But they also set us up, the journalists actually sat in the last 5 rows, just in front of the broadcast group, like with all the cameras. And because it's a real sort of performance center, there weren't bad seats. There were actually really good seats for getting a good sense of the whole place and seeing all of it, and, you know, feeling like you were a part of an interesting Apple happening.
And the acoustics were excellent. I mean, especially at the end with the U2 performance. Obviously, we discovered why the Flint Center had been chosen with its great acoustics, almost as good as the Yerba Buena Center, which they often choose for their musical guests. But this definitely rocked our socks.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into the actual fun part of this, and for what I'm guessing all our viewers are really wanting to hear about. We're going to start off with the 2 iPhone models. Start off with the iPhone 6. Chris, I know you got a hands-on with both of them. So let's start with the iPhone 6. Let's talk some specs and some initial thoughts.
So the iPhone 6, it's interesting that they launched the 6 and the 6 Plus at the same time, and everywhere you saw them together. It was rare to have a demo station where you didn't have them together. And I think that's because, the 6 by itself, if you stick it next to a 5 or a 5S, it looks huge. But stick it next to the 6 Plus, and the 6 looks just like a regular size iPod. So there's some interesting sort of sleight of hand going on here in the sizes. We could talk specs. The screen is 4.7 inches diameter for the 6 and 5.5 for the 6 Plus. I mean, as I mentioned in my review yesterday, my hands-on, the immediate response was, this thing is too big for my pocket. The same sort of feeling I get with the Galaxy, with the larger Galaxy phablets, with the Note, is exactly what I got with this. And I definitely got the sense, I described it this morning on Twitter as a compliance vehicle. And it definitely has that sense that Apple was getting so much heat for not producing a sort of phablet category device that they just went and said, okay, look, here, have this one. And there are these few extra features, like the fact that you can turn the home screen sideways. It doesn't really seem to be enough to justify its existence. Lance, what do you think?
I would. All I was going to say is I spoke to Sprint's chief marketing officer yesterday, and I was curious about. I am not somebody who likes big phones. I have a 5S. I'm super happy with that size. I've never really understood the fascination with tablets, but I also know I've been wrong about them. That there is a real desire for them. And this guy who I was talking to, the CMO, is a tall guy. He's sort of a bigger guy than me. And I asked him, what phone do you want? He was like, the 6 Plus. I mean, he didn't hesitate a moment. He's like, he's really excited about it. But the woman who was also with us, who's part of PR marketing for Sprint, obviously she was smaller than him. And she's like, no, I want this one. I don't want anything bigger than the 5S. You know, so I know that some people think, what you call, Chris, a compliance device, we have to face facts that the reality is there is a market for these giant phones. I mean, Samsung, if anybody has proven it, Samsung. I never got the Samsung Galaxy Note, and yet it's a popular phone. It was a big focus of their last event. So it's not simply, I don't think it's simply a checkbox. I really think that Apple sees some real headroom here in the marketplace for them, and they'll probably sell a lot of them.
Well, I would just sort of add that I think the way we use phones has changed in the last few years. So what was a perfect phone in 2012 or 2011 is not the same as a perfect phone now. I mean, the apps are getting much more sophisticated. The chips are much more powerful. I sort of disagree with you a little bit, Lance, because I have the same size phone as you because I use a 5C pretty regularly. But I'm not always happy with it, and I'm a tech editor. I habitually carry around like 5 phones all the time, but I do reach for that the HTC One, the latest HTC One, fairly regularly partly because of that bigger canvas. Evernote, I can just do more stuff. I can just sort of read a little more without scrolling on any particular web page. These aren't big deals, but it does sort of represent that I'm using my smartphone probably more, but also with that, I kind of want to use it more as efficiently as possible, and a big screen phone helps. Now, that said, I don't think I'm going to get the 6 Plus because the killer for me is kind of the one-handed operation, and I'm not really convinced. And Chris, you should speak to this. What it was, a reachability, right? When you tap the home button and it sort of comes down, that looks like the weirdest way to deal with that problem. Yeah. Like, maybe it'll work. I don't know, but I kind of pointed this out in some piece I wrote yesterday that I kind of prefer how the Galaxy Note does it by shifting the keyboard slightly to either side. I don't know. What was your take on reachability?
Yeah, so we're by now we're all used to the fact that Apple is, they say whenever they say they're not going to do something, they're probably going to do it, right?
Of course.
But Tim Cook, I think, was the one who first pointed this out. This rather excellent feature of the design. I've got an iPhone 5 here, of the fact that you can reach your thumb into all 4 corners when you're holding it. Now you can no longer do this with the 6 Plus, and not even, I believe, with the 6. And that does present a problem when you're commuting, when you're in any situation where you can only use one hand. The notion that you have to pull the screen down, and only use half of the screen surface that you're presented with, that really feels like a makeshift stopgap solution. That's definitely a sort of a compliance vehicle aspect to the 6 Plus. I will say, to be fair, there are features that it introduced that I was really excited about. The new cut and paste keyboard looks pretty awesome. We've all wanted larger keyboards on our iPhones for a long time, and this is finally delivered. But yeah, the fact that design constraint is no longer there, I think will lead a lot of people actually back. You may actually see an increase in 5C and 5S sales after this.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see how it breaks down between the sales on the 6 and the 6 Plus, because on the one hand, I look at the 6 Plus and I'm like, there's no way in hell. There's absolutely no way in hell that I'm getting this phone. Until they say, oh, well, it has optical image stabilization, then I'm like, because I don't want a phone that big, right? Like, I don't. Having said that, I really have come to really like the 4.7-inch form factor. Now, obviously, I haven't held the iPhone 6 yet, but I really like how, the actually the BlackBerry Z10 was a good size, but I really like the Moto X. I really like that 4.7-inch size. So I feel like maybe that can push some people another way, but I'm actually curious, Chris, to your point, I think it'll be interesting to see how people respond to this, and if Apple's finally, like, to your point, kind of, being a compliance vehicle, they're like, oh, you wanted a big phone? Here's a big phone. And then, in a couple of years, they're like, all right, we're going to go back to the small phone again because that's what we really wanted. We were forced to do this. I can't escape, I don't know about you guys, I can't escape the feeling that they are probably okay with doing the 6 and with making that size, but everything about the 6 Plus to me almost felt like Apple was holding their nose. Like, this is really not a phone that if they had it their way, they would not make this phone. Like, they admit that they have to because of the market realities and because of that, what Pete was saying, people use their phones differently and people in China are buying these things. But I couldn't help but get the sense from the entire presentation that if they had it their way, there's no way in hell that they would ever release a 5.5-inch phone. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know if it's so much holding their nose as the character of the company is different under Tim Cook, and I'm actually kind of working on a piece that talks about this right now, and it's that he's kind of chasing markets much more than Jobs ever did, but he's doing it in a very Apple-y way. And you see that not just with the phones, but with I think the Apple Watch too, which I think is probably, they weren't holding their nose at all in that one.
No.
They're very happy about the smartwatch they built. But I mean, to the 6 Plus, I definitely get what you're saying. It kind of goes against the grain of their designs so far. But honestly, I think it's going to sell like crazy in Asia.
Oh yeah, it's going to be.
I also think the use of the word chasing might be a little bit unfair because, smart business people go after market potential, right? They build and they sell to meet a perceived demand, and especially if the perception of the demand is great enough, then they will throw some real effort behind it and go after it. And I think that, honestly, what we've seen here is in part that, but also I also think that both Chris and Pete are right in that this is a new Apple. This is a company that's being run by a CEO who approaches the market and product development in a different way. And so we really, the difficult thing for people like us who've been watching this company for so long is that, we're assuming the past is prologue. And, we don't know that is true anymore. It is, even the way the event was run proves that you can't make assumptions. There isn't a script. The script is being written and rewritten all the time, and I really think it's wrong to characterize the products we saw as stopgap measures to fill an undesirable demand.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that Apple has tried dipping its toe in a new market with a new product. I mean, I still fondly remember the Apple Cube from 2001. I mean, that was...
What market was that? Museum?
That was the tissue box. That was the tissue box market.
That was
the precursor to the Mac Mini. Let's make no mistake. That was the precursor to the Mac Mini and the Apple TV, and they didn't get it right. They didn't have anything about... They didn't have anything right about like the styling. I mean, not the styling. I guess the airflow on that. But the design was perfect, and that was like that was the first thing we saw that got to their whole next generation design.
So spoke the Apple fangirl.
To that point,
good spin, Christina.
It should be okay for Apple to bring out a device and for that device to fail, because failing is such an important part of Silicon Valley design. It's no, and I worry sometimes that Apple has less room to maneuver now because they're so famous, because they're on top of the world.
Well, but let's make no mistake, the 6 Plus is not going to be a failure.
No.
I mean, come on. I know we don't know for sure, but let's be real. I mean, this is going to sell like crazy, again, like I say, particularly in Asia. I mean, it might get middling reviews, who knows? But Yeah.
Well, we know that at least one tall guy at Sprint is going to buy one.
My Twitter
Maybe this
feed
is the
pretty-
phone.
Optical image stabilization, Chris. Optical image stabilization.
My Twitter feed was pretty split between the 6 and the 6 Plus, but it's interesting. I didn't see, and granted, it's kind of self-selecting, but a lot of various people, follow me, and not just Apple fans, and it seemed pretty split 50-50, but I didn't see a ton of anybody saying, I'm not going to upgrade this time. It almost seemed like okay, even if I got the 5S, I'm going to upgrade. Like, everybody wants to upgrade. It's just a choice of, do I go big or do I go super gigantic, mega big?
Yeah, when they do these big hardware redesigns, I think we should look at the numbers on this. But in terms of the number of people upgraded even after just a year, I mean, it's just like, oh yeah, that's the new thing, because everyone will know just from a glance which iPhone you have,
Right.
whether it's a 5/5S or a 6. So, that's a factor.
Let me just jump in. We ran a poll on site yesterday after the event, asking our readers if they were more excited for the iPhone 6 or the iPhone 6 Plus. And out of roughly 2,300 votes, it's literally separated by 20 votes. A little over 50% are more excited for the iPhone 6 than the iPhone 6 Plus, but it's literally like 50.1% for
What did I tell
the
you?
iPhone 6.
What did I tell you?
Interesting.
A lot
I'd
of
love
people
to know how many of those guys are switching from Samsung. That seems
That
to be.
is what a story that is. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been hearing from, obviously it's all anecdote and doesn't have any fact behind it, but I've been hearing from so many drivers I talk to and just other people on the street who are like, oh, I can't wait to get the bigger iPhone. And these are people who have Galaxies. Some of them have Notes, some of them have just S4s, S5s, whatever. And I'm talking to so many people who are like, I can't wait to get the big iPhone.
Everyone wants more.
So in terms of actual performance, what can you guys tell us about that in terms of the new processing chip? So or the processor chip, it's what 50 times faster than the original iPhone. Is that what it was quoted at? Or
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
they didn't
was
go into a lot of details. It's interesting. I don't know about you guys, but it felt like they spent so little time on the specs. I mean, they talked a lot about the camera, but they didn't even mention anything about the GPU. They did, one gaming demo.
No, they did. They did. There was a screen on the GPU.
There was
Very
a screen
briefly.
on the GPU, but it was
Yeah.
like, okay, well, you guys saw the screen. Those of us who were trying to deal with the live stream back.
It's 84 times faster than the GPU in the original iPhone.
Right, but they're right, but I mean, but they're not. They spent so little time on the actual ins and outs. They just wanted to get to the watch. I think it'll be hard to tell. Typically with Apple, it's interesting when they do these big refresh designs. It's usually a smaller spec bump, so it's usually a smaller bump, going from the 3GS to the 4, then from the 4 to the 4S, and it's usually a bigger bump going from the 5 to the 5S versus the 5S to the 6. Just hardware-wise, it'll be interesting to see if that keeps up. But I mean, more of the same, faster, better.
Well, the big thing everyone's going to want to know though is battery life.
Yeah,
they did spec it slightly higher for the 6, but considerably higher for the 6 Plus, which makes sense because it's going to be a bigger phone, you have a bigger battery. And that, I think, might be the main reason people go for the 6 Plus. I mean, you'll finally have an iPhone that really will last all day. I mean, that seems to be it, because I know it was only about an hour extra for the 6, which is okay, well, we'll take an hour if that's all you got. But that 6 Plus, man,
That was a couple of hours more than 6 Plus. I mean, it's sort of, at a stage, a lot of the specs become meaningless, and it was interesting that Apple did move over them very quickly, because this was not a WWDC audience. This was very much the consumer crowd. But yeah, past a certain speed of chip, do we really notice the difference unless we're playing really intense games? Past a certain brightness, pixel intensity of the screen, do we really notice? Are we going to notice the difference between Retina and Retina HD? I think for the average consumer, it starts to matter less and less. And I think you're right, Pete, that battery life becomes more important. But at the same time, battery life varies so wildly. And that was one of the more interesting charts they had, that I think they had something like 35 hours of battery life on the 6 Plus for audio playback. But then, voice calls was 13, I believe.
We need a new spec. I mean, we need something that sort of combines everything realistically, because I forget where I read this, but who does 10 hours of continuous video playback? That doesn't really mean much to me. Like, a typical day has a lot of push notifications, some video, some mobile network, a lot of Wi-Fi, and my brightness is varying all over the day because I have auto brightness set. So what's the spec for that? Well, it could be a range, but clearly, I think, just from the anecdotal evidence of everyone complaining about iPhone battery life, that the demands we're putting on phones now probably have outstripped a little bit of the expectations on Apple's part. Now, whether they've adjusted for that behavior in this round, we'll see. Something tells me probably not.
Just to be fair here, battery life is an issue for every single phone manufacturer. You and I, Pete, I think all of us, and Christina, have played with many different LTE phones from many different manufacturers. And the battery life is terrible on pretty much all of them.
Well, that's not true, and I would argue this. I would argue that because other manufacturers have jumped into the phablet space before, they have had the opportunity of having these bigger form factors with bigger batteries. And if you look at an LG G3 and Galaxy Note, you are going to get through that day. You might be down to pretty far, but I've rarely used one of those phablets and had it crap out on me at 6 o'clock, which does happen fairly often with smaller phones.
Well, yeah, I mean, like the Amazon Fire and the Samsung Galaxy S series, the battery life is okay. But what I do notice on those phones that they don't do as well is they don't manage their sleep state battery power consumption as well. Like, if I don't touch my iPhone for a while, like I just leave it and I pick it up, the battery life is kind of the same as it was when I left it. But if I don't touch like the Fire phone for a while, I pick it up, I'm like, what was it doing while it was just sitting there?
Right.
So I think that there's always a software side to battery life because the technology we're dealing with has not really advanced. These lithium-ion batteries are simply not. Yeah, we
have to go nuclear.
Why do you keep saying that? Christina is stuck on.
It's a great slogan, Christina. Keep saying it.
Well, so much the battery life question is dependent on apps, right? On vampire apps running in the background, and that's one of Apple's big advantages is that iOS 8 will take advantage of that and will tell you what your app usage on the battery life is, which was in itself a third-party app area that you'd have to download a third-party app like Carrot to tell you such a thing. So,
and what I want to see is not just that place in settings where it's saying, you proactively go there and say, oh, let me. I want an alert. I want something to pop up that says like, you know what, this Evernote thingy you got going on here is really sucking your juice. You're sure you want to keep doing that? Maybe you want to go into, I want this sort of contextual-based thing because I honestly, I'm sure we all know people who probably don't even know where the settings on their iPhone is. And then the people who probably are complaining the loudest about battery life. So, let's see some alerts, too.
Yeah, so we're going to have to move on in a second, but I do want to hit one question from Michael Cromer, and he asks, do you think the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus are going to cut into the sales of the iPad and the iPad Mini as we get larger and larger with these phones?
Yes.
Yes. Next
Perfect.
question.
Done. Perfect.
Excellent question, though. It does really, it does suggest an interesting fact that we're basically on a continuum now from the 5C all the way up to the iPad Air. They're basically the same device, just slightly different form factor. One of my favorite charts yesterday put them all on a continuum with, I think, a Pop-Tart in the middle of. So the Pop-Tart is the ultimate Apple device size at this stage.
Perfect. All right, so we're now going to move on to the Apple Watch. And Lance, you had a great hands-on review of, or at least a hands-on of the watch. Not a full review, of course, but initial thoughts. So Lance, can you give a little background on your usage?
Right. So for you, in case you don't know, they came out with an Apple. It's not called the iWatch. It's called Apple Watch. It's a beautifully designed device with a lot of curves and a lot of different design styles. It doesn't, in a way, it doesn't look anything like what I expected. It doesn't even really feel as I expected it to. It's got so many curves. Most of the design, you have stainless steel, you have aluminum, you have brushed metal. So you have a lot of different looks and choices. It has the sapphire glass. That's where that ended up, and so it has this sort of almost beautiful, not curved to the whole screen. The screen is flat, but it curves on the edges to the outside of it. It feels substantial in your hand, but not overly large. But on the other hand, Apple didn't break any barriers here with the sort of the thickness of this watch. It's pretty much as thick as I'm wearing right now. I'm wearing the Moto 360. It's not as thick as this, but it's close. And it's interesting because it comes in different sizes. It comes in a sort of a size that might be more interesting to perhaps a woman, and a larger size for a man. And I saw both of those sizes, and it looked good. I don't know what they do with the extra space. Maybe you put extra batteries in a larger one. But during my hands-on time, I got a good feel of it, and I kind of want to talk a little bit more about the feel because I really found the way in which they've done a removable band to be super smart. We've seen so many variations on smartwatch bands, and some of them have been true fails. For example, Samsung's first Gear, where the camera was built into the band. By far, I don't want to say it was a dumb idea because that sounds mean. But
it was.
It was just awful, and I told them right away.
And awful.
So when you first encounter the Apple Watch, you see a band that looks beautiful and slides into the watch. It slides out sideways and slides in, and there's a little button underneath to release it. Very simple. And then we all have different size wrists, so if you get the metal band, each notch of it, like 100 pieces, you can just click and pull out, click and pull out. So you can I know a little bit about watches because I collect them. It is not easy to change the size of a metal band, but they've made it easy. And of course, they have a lot of band styles. So you've got, you have there's one edition that's built for sport. So it's got like this sort of gel band. It's actually a special polymer that feels very different. They've got the aluminum one, which is really for the sort of which is also the same one for active life. There's stainless steel. Oh, and there's gold. Solid gold.
Solid gold.
Carat gold. Heavy, and I'm sure it'll be really expensive, but really beautiful. The interface that I saw, I have to, it was such a sort of canned demo. It wasn't complete. You could do some stuff, but you really couldn't explore. But I could see the quality of the screen. It is a Retina display. It looks beautiful. Everything is super clear. You've got on the side, you have a digital dial, a digital crown that you kind of use to scroll and move about, zoom in and zoom out. That felt good and looked nice. There's a big button on the side that you press in. It has sensors on the back for heartbeat. I felt the haptic, or what they call taptic vibration, which works with sound and imagery, really smooth. The thing I probably dislike the most about Apple's watch, though, is this idea of digital touches, I think they call it. I don't get this concept. No, it's force touch.
Oh, the sexting.
Yeah, right. It's like this whole thing for Snapchat people. Basically, instead of responding with voice or words, you might respond with a little drawing or your heartbeat.
It's Yo for biometrics.
Yeah, I would not respond with my heartbeat. So
it's the new sexting. I already called it yesterday. It's already been called.
But I know that's not. I totally get that that's not for me. That is not designed for me. I feel that at $349 it's more expensive than I had hoped, and that's the starting price. I know there's storage on board, but I'm not clear how much, because they did say you can have music stored on the device. We don't know exactly when it's coming out. We do know that it really is a companion device for the phone, but we don't know the entire extent of that. We do also know, and I saw some of this in action, that the health stuff, like the heart rate monitor and all that, doesn't need to work, doesn't need a phone to work. So it's exciting, it's beautiful, but there's so many questions right now about what this really is and what it'll be like to wear it long term, and whether or not people will adopt it.
So Lance, you've at least convinced me that Apple will succeed in revolutionizing the watch band industry. Which, as you were saying, how easy this is and how it compares to like metal bands today, I'm kind of like, why hasn't the watch industry addressed that issue? Because like, you have to go to a watch store just to shrink your band, and it's like, why does that even happen? Why not just do this magnet thing that Johnny Ive came up with? Why does it take Apple to figure this out?
Well, it's exactly the same reason that the car industry has not gone all electric yet, even though it's because that's so much easier. It's like mechanics hate electric cars because there's nothing for them to do, and watch stores will hate the Apple Watch because there's no band for them to adjust.
But will they? Because now, theoretically, because everyone has stopped wearing watches, watch stores aren't doing the business they were, 20, 30 years ago, but Apple could just start this whole thing over again. But I'm not convinced quite yet. I mean, the Apple Watch, I want to pass it over to you right away, Chris, because I know you've also checked it out. But, I've used a bunch of smartwatches, and although I like my notifications and, I see benefits to them, I've been slowly convinced that maybe the whole category is never going to be the size that a lot of people are thinking it will be. Because, Todd Wasserman had a very persuasive piece on Mashable last night on why he's not buying an iWatch. Or sorry, an iWatch. We're all going to keep making that mistake, and I believe
even Tim Cook makes that mistake.
Yeah, well, exactly. I heard that. He did it on show. That's right.
Well, Todd is just being the new Farhad, so he's just being... He's just being...
I think he's just grumpy. Has Todd ever worn any smartwatch?
No.
I don't think so. I mean, he's we've got a few in.
Well, I've got to say, I think we should do a follow-up story and have him wear one of our, wear one of our.
Give him a Pebble. I think he'd love a Pebble.
Yes, Christina, you and I are on the same page.
Pebble
is the watch that convinced me that smartwatches could be for everyone, but.
I would say you two are synchronized, Lance.
Yes,
not
we
on
are.
the same page.
I just got the Moto 360 convinced me that there's potential, but you have to get the software right. That this device from Motorola is one of the better looking ones, a little bit large, but it sort of had this. I think it's partly Android Wear, just sort of some frustrating software that made it a little bit harder to use than I expected. Whereas Pebble, it's simple. So for Apple, to get Apple Watch right, this has to work so beautifully out of the box. And I have to say, at the very least, they've introduced an interface that looks almost unlike anybody else's. And they've focused super heavily on design, and I guess you might say allure. When you look at these things, you're like, ooh, that's kind of pretty. I might want to wear that because I'll look cool and fashionable, not necessarily thinking about I'll be connected and I'll be tracking my activities. So, and I think for wearable technology, that has to be the first thing, that you want to own it and wear it because it's going to look good on you and to a certain extent make you look good.
And it is an enormously risky bet for Apple because, as many people have pointed out, normally they do, one or two or three iterations of the product, and they do it very well. Here we've got, I haven't even counted how many different versions of the Apple Watch we're going to get.
34 different bands across 3 different body types. So I did the math. It's like 200,000 or something combinations. It's insane.
And
if you factor in the watch faces, it goes into the millions.
Yeah.
Tim Cook says anyway.
Extraordinarily risky. I mean, we've got a video going up shortly of my experience with the iWatch. We cut together a sort of very quick video of this, but in the more in-depth version, you can see how much of a struggle I'm having with the magnetic clasp that I had. I had this midnight blue leather regular Apple Watch, and just could not for the life of me figure out how the two magnetic clasps on the side were supposed to work, and I couldn't do it. You know, I saw where they pressed in. I did not figure out how to lift it up. And
show us your scar, Chris.
My scar from where I was tased by the Apple PR for daring to have a problem with an Apple device. No, it's you know, we were certainly dragged away from that demo station pretty quickly.
It's your fault, Chris. It's your fault. We don't have more hands-on videos. You couldn't get the clasps to work.
I couldn't get the clasps to work. But people are going to have this problem, and Apple, you know, they really, I mean, they must be buying magnets by the truckload for the Apple Watch. Because they put magnets all over this thing. You know, it's how it's going to charge. It's how all of these clasps are going to work. And
well, it'll keep you healthy too, right?
Yes, that's why Dr. Oz. That's why Dr. Oz was there. Now we know why.
Yeah, but he didn't show up on stage. There were a number of people who didn't. You know, him and Gwen Stefani didn't show up on stage. So I don't know.
They're just fans, I guess.
Yeah, fans just wanted to be there.
But with 34 different straps.
Yeah, they needed to fill that theater. You know, remember when Samsung invited everybody? It's just Apple invites all their celebrity friends. Anyway, go on. But yeah, 34 different straps.
34 different straps. One of them is going to go wrong, or enough people are going to have a problem with one of those straps that you know, Apple is going to, you know, that the whole category is going to get tarred with it. And there are a lot of kinks to work out. I mean, we know that we know that the battery life is now, you know, Apple. If this was the gaping hole in the presentation, Apple did not say how long the battery life was going to be. Tim Cook did obliquely suggest that you're going to need to plug it in every night. And you basically have your watch charger on your nightstand, and you take it off and plug it in every night. And that seems to be the thinking. I mean, I think that it's inevitable that the Apple Watch will dominate the category. It's just a question of when.
Yeah.
And it may take 2 or 3 generations. Just as it did with the iPhone. I mean, we all remember the original iPhone, as groundbreaking as it was this giant brick that worked on Edge, not even 3G. You know,
but it's still,
when we got the 3G version, then it wouldn't last for a whole day of charge. You know, so it does take a few versions to work out the kinks. And it's just us early adopters who are going to.
But I think, you know, taking a little while to work out the kinks, in the case of wearables, for most people has meant, you know, little to no sales. Whereas Apple has not really experienced that. Apple will deliver something and will continue to improve it, but all the while will sell millions.
Unless it's the iPod boombox. Remember that?
All right. Well,
yeah, those first two I know your point, Lance. The first 2 generations of iPhone, people loved them.
Yeah.
They didn't see the flaws. They saw this revolutionary device.
Exactly. So this is a situation that's very unusual for Apple because that it may not be the expectation. You know, that it's been so hard to break through on the wearable side with consumers. You know, Samsung has sort of said, we're going to make it so present and so in your face and just so continuous that you can't deny, you can't ignore them, and eventually you will succumb. You know, we are up to the 4th generation of the Gear, the Samsung Gear, and you know, they've made a lot of changes. It's gotten bigger, it's gotten smaller, it's gotten thinner, it's gotten curved, it's gotten smooth stuff, and they don't stop. But I don't think they really sell either. Apple they just got up on stage, introduced a new category, and very much in the vein of the iPhone and the iPad said, and you will see it next year. Which means that they want to polish and perfect until they think they have a 1 million unit seller. And
exactly.
Well, I also think they want to discourage anyone who might be thinking about buying a smartwatch this holiday to just hold off and save that money, and, you know, maybe wait until next year.
Yeah, no, I think, but yeah, I agree with both of you guys. I mean, I think I was saying this yesterday. You know, what they showed off, the fact that it was this controlled demo, they are not done with this yet. They are still finishing how this thing is going to work. And I'm sure that they will probably, there might still be issues with the band, to Chris's point, but they are going to be fixing this thing so that they can have, to Lance's point, a million seller. This is going to be a big deal. One thing I'm really kind of curious about how I guess they position this in terms of the pricing, but I'm also really excited about the apps, because that's the one thing I think that Apple has on its side that none of the other players have even remotely close. Pebble has come the closest with actually cultivating a real developer community, but nobody's building anything of value for Android Wear. Sorry guys, but you're not. And there's not really anything for the Samsung platforms. You've got to rely on like the big companies to integrate, whereas Apple out of the gate, they're going to have all kinds of partnerships. Like it's going to be awesome, and that's I think the real potential is like what do developers build for these things now that they had the toolkit, and will that change what the Apple Watch is the same way that it changed what the iPhone was and it changed what the iPad was?
Okay, guys, Christina just said no one's building anything of value on Android Wear on Google+, so we all need to put a duck right
You're
now.
not, though.
Prove
me wrong. Seriously, somebody prove me wrong, but I'm not seeing anything.
No, so this is a perfect point where we can move on to the next topic. We're going to end on Christina's note there for the Android Wear community. I also like the fact that you guys answered some questions that were in our Q&A app without me even having to ask them. So Lewis had asked how the launch of the Apple Watch kind of compared a little bit to the original iPhone, and we kind of had a discussion there, and then also our thoughts on kind of the iterations of the Apple Watch. So nice job with that, guys.
I would like to raise one more point on the Apple Watch, and it's just this. If the iPhone 6 Plus has a problem that the screen may be too large, the Apple Watch, for all its beauty, and it is a beautiful device, I love wearing it, even if I couldn't get the clasp off, is the screen may be too small. And what you may see next year is a lot of people standing on street corners doing this, just staring directly at their wrist, which is not a very sort of a cool and sexy Apple thing to do. And it just fundamentally, they have dictation on this watch, which they're not calling Siri. Okay, we can have another discussion about that. But who's going to be doing the Dick Tracy thing into their watch the whole time?
The other guys have that too. Right. Don't forget, they also pointed out that they'll use the vibrations in really smart ways, so that if you're wearing it, you don't have to know which way to go, because the map app will basically vibrate left or right to let you know which way to turn. So I think it's going to be a mix of that. It's a fair concern, but I really think it's going to be more of a mix.
Great. Okay. So that is. Now Lance has the final word on Apple Watch for today. So we just have a few minutes left, but we really need to get to Apple Pay, which is their mobile payments platform. And we had a piece today that talked about how it's definitely a hit on Wall Street. So Lance, I want to start with you. I know you're taking a deep dive into this, so I'll throw it to you first.
Yeah, so I really, even during the event, as I was starting to settle in, I got this sense that this Apple Pay thing was important. But at first I couldn't figure out why I thought it was, and it kind of boils down to something super, super simple. We all buy stuff. We may not all buy Apple iPhones. We may not all want wearables. But every person sitting here right now, and basically everybody in the world buys stuff one way or the other. In the U.S., obviously, in particular, since this isn't going to be global at first, they've got to line up all those credit card companies. But Apple has done some interesting stuff here. I think the mobile payments is nothing new. NFC, which is near field communication, nothing new. But the combination of what they're offering, in particular, with the built-in Touch ID that exists on not just the 6 and the 6 Plus, but obviously on the 5S, is important, because that's a level of authentication that is hard to replicate if you don't have that. Now, there are other smartphones with touch, with basically biometrics, but they're not all integrating. So Apple kind of has leapfrogged a little bit here with the integration for mobile payments that also they've managed to gather up Visa and MasterCard, Wells Fargo, and they say it's like 83% of the credit card sort of buying public. That's a hard number to sort of verify, but this is the thing that really propels mobile payments forward. The digital wallet idea that Google has been trying to really do since 2011, that NFC has been trying to propel forward since before 2006. That all of these things have not quite come together in such a way as we've seen before. And there's something to keep in mind. This is sort of classic Apple. Everybody else kind of running around, bumping into walls, trying to figure out a problem, throwing stuff out there. Apple walks in and goes, wait a minute, this is the way you do it. And everybody goes, oh, of course. Now, I don't know if that's exactly how things are going to run here, but I do think that this was probably in some ways more important than anything else that Apple brought up yesterday. And judging by the reaction on Wall Street, not Wall Street, but investors and entrepreneurs, e-commerce entrepreneurs who are at the event, judging by some of the reactions and some of the analysts I've spoken to, they see the potential. They know the pitfalls and the risks here, but they see the potential and do definitely believe it's important.
Mm. Apple Pay was definitely the most underrated portion of the keynote event, and I think the most underrated portion of the Apple Pay part was the open table integration. This notion, I mean, Apple is trying to go for seamless integration throughout this, using your iTunes credit card that they already have on file, so you don't even need to enter any new credit card information. But the open table integration with participating restaurants, we'll have to find out who they are. But this idea that you just pay for your check without them even bringing the check to the table at the restaurant. It's just all taken care of within OpenTable. That's a fantastic idea. That's almost like the whole Uber concept of frictionless payment for taxis.
And Uber's payment is built into it too.
Right. So linking up all of these things, using your iTunes credit card, using the camera to input a new credit card. I mean, they've gone all out here on the seamlessness. I think the weak point, to be honest, is how many of those point-of-sale devices with the NFC reader in them tend not to work. I mean, I got a credit card, I don't know about you guys, but I got a credit card like 4 or 5 years ago that was supposed to work with one of those devices. The first 3 or 4 times it didn't. I just quit using it. I went back to swiping.
But keep in mind, Chris. This is why I think Apple. I understand that that there have been technical difficulties on the NFC side as far as those readers working, but that probably wasn't a super solution anyway, because basically what you were doing there is using a credit card and tapping. But if you dropped your credit card, someone else picks it up. They tap.
Well, clearly the solution is Apple needs to step in and start building these credit card readers. Because then they'll just work, right?
Yep.
No, I hear what you mean, but I mean it's like I think you're right, Chris, and that might be one of the weaknesses. But ultimately, it's making it so seamless, because I was just talking about this with someone. What are you doing in line when you're waiting to pay for something? You're on your phone.
Yeah.
You have your phone out. It's not really even asking you to do anything other than you're already doing. I think Apple Pay, it finally will, and one of the other advantages it has over Android solutions, which obviously have existed for a while, is there's no app to download.
Right.
You got an iPhone 6, you can do it. Though I think you might be wrong, Chris. I think you actually do have to input your credit card to Passbook, separate from your iTunes account. But
right.
Because it's stored locally now. In the
secure element.
Yeah. There's no exchange of the number anymore.
Exactly.
The actual credit card number. But Christina knows exactly how this works.
Yeah, no. So what they're doing is there's a secure element as part of NFC, and this is actually the reason why Google Wallet failed, and it has failed. I mean, Google's admitted that it's failed, was that Google wanted full control over that secure element, which is where these cards are stored. Some of the banks were on board, most of them weren't. Some of the credit card companies were on board, like MasterCard was. I was able to get a Citibank MasterCard to work with it. That was the only one. The wireless carriers were not on board. They didn't want Google to control the secure element. So it seems like what Apple has done is they've kind of had a compromise in that nobody controls it except for the phone itself. And so your data is only stored on that part of the phone, and it's not controlled by Apple, it's not controlled by the carrier, and then you authenticate using that secure element with these point-of-sale systems. But but it's separate from what your iTunes account is, so it's not as if Apple's getting all of your credit card data. One of those cards might be attached to your iTunes account, but any of the other cards that are part of it are part of a completely separate system. So it's not like you can buy another phone and then have your Apple, Pay stuff immediately go over to the new one. At least I don't think. I think you'd have to probably authenticate each card, individually for a new device.
Yeah, that makes sense.
True. Yeah,
unless you're restoring a backup, maybe.
Right.
Yeah. But you can do that pretty easily for $200.
You can.
Separate issue.
I would just say, think about the fact that, so Walgreens is one of the launch partners for Apple Pay. Think about being in line at Walgreens. Think about going up to the counter with a, counter clerk who's maybe not familiar with the system, and you've got a long line of people behind you. Is that Apple Pay going to work first time when you tap it? Is it going to, or is it going to?
Right. Well, that's
create an embarrassing scene.
Yeah, it's a good question.
But at least people will try it.
But
whereas with Google Wallet, I don't think anyone bothered.
Right.
No, I tried. I used it at Walgreens once, and it did kind of work, and they were sort of trained. But I have to wonder. I'm curious if their implementation on this is going to be such that if it couldn't scan for some reason with the NFC, if your card is part of Passbook, if they could scan a barcode or something. I don't know how it would work.
Because you don't. Okay, so obviously you can use if you have the app. So for example, with Target.
Yeah.
You don't even you're not using NFC. You're basically using Touch ID to buy through the app. They've enabled that. So you don't have to have NFC. But the other thing to keep in mind is, so I have an iPhone 5S. When I first got it, early on, and even actually before when I was testing the devices, I found Touch ID was somewhat flaky. Then I got a software update. I use Touch ID every single day. It's how I unlock my phone. I almost never put in my passcode. It's how I buy apps. And this will be something that will become a learned or trained response from people, because they will assume that that's how you buy things. And they will get good at using Touch ID, of having it recognize the thumb or other fingers. So that is probably the trickiest part of this, and they will get that. They will have a phone that does it, and tapping will be easy. I think that Touch ID ends up being a real key here.
That's a really good place for us to actually end on. We're coming up, actually a little over our time. I want to give you guys each 30 seconds, just final thoughts. So we're going to do rapid fire really quick. Pete, final thoughts.
I think the next iPhone, they did both of them together. We're going to see a spike in iPhone sales that we haven't seen since the 5. I think this is the next earnings, full earnings with the iPhone sales is going to be massive. I think the watch, it's going to be the best-selling smartwatch ever, which isn't saying much. But it is the right approach to involve fashion from the start. I think that's what's been lacking. People have talked about design. People have, Moto 6 Series is great design, but Apple has really involved fashion. And that's a big deal. And we've already kind of covered Apple Pay. It's the thing that's going to change the world the most from that presentation in the shortest period of time.
Great. Christina?
All right. So I'm totally almost want to mirror exactly what Pete said. I think that the 6, the 6 Plus are going to be huge sellers. I personally can't wait to try the 6 out and see how it feels. I think the watch is the very definition of an Apple 1.0 product, in that it's going to be the genesis of an idea of what could be, but it's probably going to take a few iterations before we see what it could become. But that doesn't mean that it won't be really exciting to watch. And no pun intended. Fashion is going to be a big part. And Apple Pay, take my money. Already Apple's taking my money. Now I can just pay with my Apple devices. It's awesome. No more wallet. Just give it all to Apple, right? I'm doing it anyway.
There you go. Chris?
So Apple's such an awesome company that, we really have to be careful about, believing everything that they say. And, we have to, even at the risk of being churlish, look at the holes in the presentation.
Sure.
And there are definitely, there are questions that keep popping up that don't get answers. Like, for example, we're told you can use the Apple Watch to pay with the Apple Pay system. we don't know how you're going to authenticate that. That's a massive hole.
Yeah.
Not all of what we saw yesterday is going to work as advertised, but if even 50% of it does, we're going to be in a much happier world, I think, and the rest will get ironed out over the next 3 or 4 years.
Perfect. And Lance, bring us home.
I was not disappointed. Honestly, it's tough to go into these events, Apple events, with high expectations because, for a few years now, they've delivered great products but little true excitement. And I didn't feel that way this time. I thought that this was fresh, new. They kind of wiped the slate clean on design. They did go forward into new categories. They're trying stuff that other people have done and have failed doing, which is classic Apple, and made me feel good. And Tim Cook embraced a key element of the Apple ethos, which is one more thing. I thought that there was a misunderstanding by Cook of what that really meant, that he really thought it was all about Steve Jobs, and he finally realized it's not. It's something that people expect from Apple. There will always be one more thing, something special to buy, to hold, to own, to try out. So he finally fulfilled them. He finally went ahead and did it, and now has fully embraced it. Hopefully he doesn't overuse it. So I'm excited to try stuff out, but I think Chris's cautionary words are well said and necessary because we all have to get, it's kind of a heady place during that event. You're breathing in kind of this weird kind of air, and you do get a little bit, I don't know, you just you have to detox. I'm pretty well detoxed by now.
That's great. And for those of you who stuck around for this very robust MashTalk Hangout, thank you so much. There was a lot of information in there. So obviously a quick thank you to Pete, Lance, Christina, and Chris for all the great information. And I have to shout out this comment from Chloe, who one of our viewers, who said, "Your Hangout works a lot better than Apple's live stream." So I'm going to say that's a thumbs up.
We forgot to have a Chinese translator. That was the only thing.
Yeah, well, once we get the budget for that, we'll include it. So for all of you, again, who followed, thank you so much. Continue tweeting with us, #MashTalk, and continue to follow our coverage of Apple. There's a lot more that's coming out today and throughout the rest of the week and onward. So thank you all again, and we'll see you soon. Take care.